Welcome, everyone. I'm Meg Carney, the founding director of the Solstice MFA and Creative Writing program here at LaSalle University. And welcome to the first in a series of 7 readings taking place as part of our summer residency start of our fall semester. As we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to note that we acknowledge that the territory on which LaSalle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. LaSalle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history and continued efforts of the Native and Indigenous community leaders who make up Eastern Massachusetts and the surrounding region. The statement is one small step in acknowledging the history that brought us to reside on this land and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land is itself a colonial concept. Many tribes had seasonal relationships with the land we currently inhabit. Today, Newton and Auburndale are still home to Indigenous peoples, including the Nipmuc Nation and the Massachusetts peoples. So for more information, you can visit the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness and the Commission on Indian Affairs of the state of Massachusetts. And now for tonight's reading. First up, we will have Jennifer Murvin, who will be introduced by fiction student Ryan Labie. Then we will have Noah Shea, an alum and one of the summer's graduate assistants, introduced by fellow alum and graduate assistant Temple Lovely. Then poetry faculty member Kathleen Aguero will be introduced by poetry student Bob Whalen, and we'll conclude with David Yoo, who teaches fiction for YA fiction and adult fiction, as well as creative nonfiction here at Solstice. And he will be introduced by YA fiction student Louis Lasavita. So Ryan, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce tonight's first reader, Jennifer Murvin. Jen Murvin is a multifaceted talent, a writer, a professor, and a proud owner of Pagination Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Springfield, Missouri. I first met Jen in 2018, 2019, I believe. I was just a disillusioned film student at MSU, and I was just not having a good time. It seemed like every teacher I had just didn't want to be there. Every student I had just wanted to be the brightest star in the room. But the highlight of the semester was a nonfiction creative writing class taught by Jen. Her class was a refreshing contrast to the film courses, and pretty much not long after I changed my degree plan and became a creative writing student. If you've spoken with Jen, you know she lives and breathes the written and illustrated word. Her enthusiasm is infectious, and if you are fortunate as I was to take one of her courses or to be taught by her, you'll know that there is no place she'd rather be than inspiring students and talking shop, or at least she's really good at faking it. I don't know. William Butler Yeats said, "Education is not filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And that perfectly describes being around Jen Murvin. Her passion truly lights fires. Jen's literary accomplishments are equally impressive. This August, her chapbook, She Says, will be released by Small Harbor Publishing. And in 2025, we can all look forward to her full-length story collection, Real California Living, published by Braddock Avenue Books. Her work spans a diverse range of formats, genres, with essays and stories and graphic narratives featured in esteemed journals like Craft, Hayden Ferry Review, Longleaf Review, and River Styx, just to name a few. And Jen's storytelling prowess was recognized in 2015 when she won the American Shorter Fiction Contest. Beyond her writing, Jen is an esteemed educator, shaping minds as an assistant professor at English Missouri State University since 2009. She teaches creative writing across multiple genres and is known for her ability to inspire her students, making her a favorite among the student body. Please join me in welcoming someone I consider a friend and a mentor, Jennifer Murvin.
Feel like I should sit down now while I'm ahead. Thank you, Ryan. It's so cool to have you here. Like, this is amazing. And I'm just really grateful to be here. I wrote it down just in case. My name is Jen. I just want to thank Meg and Quentin for making all of this possible. And I'm so honored to read tonight with Noah, Kathy, and David to kick off residency. No pressure. No pressure at all. This community is a huge gift in my life, and I'm just really grateful for each of you and to just be up here and be a part of this amazing place. I'm reading tonight from my little chapbook that's coming out soon called She Says. It's a deeply nerdy project, so hopefully I'm among fellow nerdy people. They're all rewrites of famous short stories by men that I have reimagined from a minor women character's point of view. So deep cuts, some of this. But super fun. I highly recommend it as an exercise. The one I'm going to read tonight is called Ruffle, which is a rewrite of Robert Olin Butler's short story, Jealous Husband Returns in Form of Parrot. So I'm just going to let that sink in. Sums it up. In the original, the story is narrated by the husband who has died and returned in the form of a parrot. He is bought by his widow at the pet store and taken home, where he watches her from his cage. He is, of course, a jealous husband who, in the original, you learn that he's very convinced that his wife is cheating on him, for which there is zero evidence, and stalks her, eventually climbing up a tree to peer into her window, where he falls out of it and dies, and is reborn as a parrot. As I'm reading, you can sort of imagine that the whole time that she's talking about her parrot, her dead, jealous husband is peeking out from within. Okay, here we go. Ruffle. I'm going to start with an epigraph from the original. She appeared in the den naked. I have not seen her naked since I fell from the tree and had no wings to fly. But now she appears from the hallway and I look at her and she is still slim and she is beautiful, I think. At least I clearly remember that as her husband, I found her beautiful in this state. Now, though, she seems too naked, plucked. I find that a sad thing. I want to pluck some of my own feathers, the feathers from my chest, and give them to her. I love her more in that moment, seeing her terrible nakedness, than I ever have before. Okay. Parrots are so beautiful, I've always thought, like flirtatious women at a party, one drink in and all dressed up. Hello, I say to the parrot. It bows to me as if asking for a dance. Pretty bird, I say. I want to speak its language. What a pleasure to look at birds in the middle of the day with the smell of wood shavings and birdseed and stale pet food. Hello, the parrot says back. My laugh is deep and sincere. It feels good to laugh this way. I will buy this bird as a pet. I will keep it and feed it. The power to make this decision feels as good as the laugh. Outside, the wet air of a Houston summer is not unlike a jungle. Pretty bird, I say again, because what if the bird missed it the first time? What you got there, Joe says. He doesn't let me too long in a store by myself. I want to say, what do you think I got, Joe? An armadillo? But instead I say, a parrot, of course. His breath is not good as he rests his chin on my shoulder, poking his face bones into my skin. The bird shrinks back a little. Quite a specimen, Joe says, loud enough for the young cashier to hear him. Joe doesn't talk to just one person, even when it's just him and me. It's like a camera is on him or something. He talk? He says hello. The parrot surely has more words it just isn't willing to share right now, which I respect. Joe is circling the cage like shopping for a car. I want him, I say. The cashier hears and comes over. This is a yellow nape Amazon. We call him Sammy. Sammy is not the parrot's name, I think, but I do not want to argue with the cashier. He is young with some pimples across his cheeks. He will be handsome one day when he grows into himself. He will be strong. I imagine him with a woman, his face against hers, gentle with her hair. What do I need to buy? He speaks softly, and when his voice lowers, Joe comes over and puts his hands around my waist. The parrot moves toward me also. I buy the parrot toys, food, and a big black iron cage I can barely fit in the car. Joe thinks I'm nuts, but by that he means I'm sweet and cute. The way he says it makes me know this. I will put the parrot in the front room by the window so he can see the magnolias, so he can see their velvety petals against the bright blue. Yellow nape Amazon parrots are named such for the yellow streak at the bottom of their necks. Otherwise, they are green like a lush spring. They are green like jewels or a mossy river in the morning. Their beaks are strong and they like to chew. I have bought Sammy, though I know that is not his name, toys, and sometimes I watch him and he attacks the toy like his life depends on it. I want to chew something like my parrot chews his toys. I chew Joe this way maybe, and I feel the urge to bite again. Things that don't fly, parrot toys, parrot seed, a man's pair of pants, a man. The parrot bites my neighbor's son when he puts his hand inside the cage. I think he's jealous, my neighbor says, laughing at her son. Bad bird, the boy says. I suspect the boy pees on the toilet seat purposely before he leaves. My neighbor is very sweet. Sometimes she brings me baked goods made with coconut, which is my favorite. Later, I find a toy of the little boys in the yard, an action figure, and I put it inside the bird cage for my parrot to play with. He leaves it alone, and eventually I take the action figure out of the cage and throw it into the trash. Yellow-naped Amazon parrots are known for nest protective behaviors. But if something can leave the parrot's nest, is it part of the nest at all? Surely there is a difference between the nest itself and the things that live in the nest. I imagine my parrot with its gray feet like a dinosaur's, guarding his nest with historical impulse, his voice repeating hello. In Hawaiian, the same word means hello and goodbye, which might be confusing, though economical. One day, I leave the door of the cage open to see what he'll do. He flies out and right into the glass door. His little head hits the glass with a terrible noise, and I think I've killed him. But he is just stunned. His feathers move, and I pick him up in my hand, and he is as light as a coconut flake. Against my chest, I imagine I can feel his heart fluttering. What did I think was going to happen, leaving the door open? I am as cruel as a word that can mean itself and its opposite. When I weep, my tears fall onto my parrot's green feathers, and they take on a look of a swamp at dusk. In Houston, swamps have alligators, which are also green, though they have teeth, and my parrot only a beak, which he does not open to say anything as I hold him, his tiny body, fragile and shimmering. Later, when I tell Grant what I want him to do with me, when I listen for his accent thick like an Amazon summer, when I climb his tall body like a palm, I'm aware of my parrot down the hall, his cage door closed. I hear a tinkle of a bell, and I know he is attacking his toy again, that satisfying release. Grant thinks the sound is a wind chime, and he says he'd like to get some for his porch. Grant likes to walk around half naked, and I admire his body for what it can do to mine, for how he holds it with the foundation of his cowboy boots. When Grant walks past the cage, the parrot calls after him, Cracker. Cracker, oh dear. Hello, Cracker, the parrot calls again. Funny little thing, Grant says, his mouth against my neck as he winds a hand up my skirt, and I think what a pleasure it is to be a woman in her own home. Pretty bird, the parrot calls, and I'm glad he's cheering himself up, but all I can hear is Grant's breath in my ear and my own moans. Things that cannot fly, wind chimes, an iron cage, a glass door, a man's shoe, a man. My neighbor once told me a story about her little boy, that she had threatened to take a toy from him when he was being disobedient in the car, and that he had himself thrown the toy out the window, preferring to destroy the thing itself before someone else could take it away. We clasped each other's hands a bit after that story, she telling it, me hearing. It is not lost on me that the color for jealousy is green, though I imagine jealousy green is not a pretty green like my parrot's feathers, which shine in the sunlight that comes through the glass door that seems like something you could fly through, but you can't. A house without children is called an empty nest, but what about a house without a husband? Things that fall out of trees, acorns, seeds, green husbands, baby parrots who do not yet know how to fly. After Grant is asleep, such a tall, strong man, my Grant, I like him so much more than Joe, and I can't wait to hear his accent again in the morning. I walk naked into the living room to see what the parrot is up to. I want a snack, and in this second life, I no longer deny myself when I want something. Hello, says the parrot. I walk into the kitchen and the air from the refrigerator cools my bare stomach. There is fruit and cheese. Hello, says the parrot. He really is a darling little pet. I'm so glad his head survived the hit to the glass. Pretty bird, he says as I ran to the living room. His eyes are doing the funny thing they do. Eye pinning, this is called when a parrot expands and contracts his pupils, a sign of stress or excitement. Did I think the waiter was handsome? My dead, fallen husband wanted to know. Why was I looking at the cashier? How long had I spent with the electrician? What was the smell on the sheet? I wonder, what if the neighbor's little boy had chosen to throw his mother out of the window instead of his toy? Soon the little boy will be a man. Green, a pretty color, I think, but not beautiful. I ring the parrot's little bell, but he does not attack. Pretty, the parrot says. Bad, he says. Open, he says, and I open his door. My sweet little parrot, I am so glad I bought him. What do people do without pets? A person needs something to care for. Up, he says, like a child. I reach in and he climbs into my hand, his finely naked feet on my naked fingers. I imagine for a moment my parrot as a little poet with only few words available to him, a prompt, a restriction meant ultimately to free up the creative mind. Sometimes there is a danger to imagining a story that isn't true, the biggest danger being imagining it so much you make it so. Poor baby, I say to my parrot, who is trembling against my hand. I want him to be free, like me, but his little claws dig in so tight. If I plucked his feathers, I could make a little crown. I could make earrings. I could adorn a hat. Poor baby, he echoes, and I think, those are my poetry words. Go get your own. Bad bird, he says. I want to tell him, stop accusing yourself and everybody else. A bird cannot be bad any more than a man can fly out of a tree. Soon my neighbor's little boy will have no toys left with which to play, and what will occupy his time then? Grant walks in, his boots on and nothing else. He likes to make me laugh. He doesn't mind that I taste like fruit, that maybe I have left none for him. Peanut, says my parrot, and we laugh because it's funny, parrot asking for a peanut when we have none. Hello, the parrot says as we walk away. Does he in fact mean goodbye? The parrot talks some more, his words as confusing as a door made of glass, but I no longer hear him as I am entering a jungle of my own. Grant's boots are off and so am I, into a bed that is not a nest, but a sky. Thank you.
All you tall people up here with your giant microphones. That was fantastic, Jen. That was beautiful. Can we get another round of applause for Jen? I'm excited for that to come out for real. All right. Well, I'm going to introduce Noah. Some have described Noah Shea as an enigma, a mysterious figure, a shadow in the corner of your eye, a horrifying visage beyond human comprehension. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating that one a bit. But yesterday I saw a spider come out of his hair and he greeted it and said, hello, friend. So I'm not sure. It is true, though, that when I first met Noah last summer, I knew very little of him. It was both of our first summer residencies as grad assistants on a new and strange and humid campus. We were briefly introduced and then quickly thrown into battle against faulty air conditioning, unyielding unlocking doors, haunted electronics, and blistering sun. As we set up the Solstice Sanctuary, you are now all in. You're welcome. Through this time together, the clouded visage of Noah began to dissipate like a heat mirage. And I came to know the gentle and caring character that is Noah, a cooling balm in the midst of a heated and tense situations, both emotional and physical. He is an adept assistant here and at his day job, willing to assist however he can with a hint of humor, a hearty laugh, and fantastic attention to detail. His Solstice manuscript, Beneath the Rose, is a historical novel detailing the missions of Abel Duncan, a member of the Union Army acting as a spy in the Southern Confederacy. And much like the ever-encompassing heat of this Massachusetts summer, Noah is able to bathe his readers in sensory details so you feel the sweat of stress on your neck with Abel or the worries of the setting sun in your stomach. Insider knowledge also tells me that Noah is now working on something new that may feed more into the mystifying lore surrounding Noah. Perhaps a mystery? May we hope to get a glimpse of it tonight. Please help me in welcoming Noah.
Oh, thank you so much, Temple. That was really sweet, and you made me sound very compelling, so I appreciate that. So just to provide a little bit of context of what I'm going to read tonight, this is a mystery story, and it's about a professor named Dr. Ward who's found murdered in his office. Another professor, Dr. Vasquez, and two students discover his body, and they also find several bloody handprints on the professor's door, covering it from top to bottom. And the part I'm going to read tonight is after the students and the professor call the police, and the police begin their investigation. A portly campus PD officer with sports shades and a buzz cut ran past Dr. Vasquez's open door. All three of us followed him. The officer slowed to a jog and then a walk as he approached Dr. Ward's door. He knocked, and when there was no answer, he shoved it open. Then, before he even stepped into the room, he doubled over and puked. Vomit streaked down his chin and splattered on the white tiles. We formed a small crowd behind the officer, but then he stepped back. Stay right here, he ordered us between gasps. Don't go in there. He kept one hand on his gun, but for now it stayed in its holster. That was one squeamish cop. You'd think that they'd be better trained on this type of thing, but when I looked back into the room, I understood. Dr. Ward's body had been moved, whereas when we first discovered him, he had been sprawled across his desk. He was now leaning back in his chair. Someone had removed his eyes. What happened? We weren't away from the office for more than 10 minutes. No fucking way, Dr. Vasquez said. After a moment, he said, sorry, I didn't realize I said that out loud. This doesn't make any sense, said Miriam. I understand that this is a lot for you to take in, but I'm going to need you all to cooperate with me. The officer had composed himself, but he made no effort to comfort us. I'm going to make sure the room is clear, and I need you to wait for the other officers to arrive. Then you can tell them your side of the story. No, you don't understand, Miriam protested. We just found the body not 15 minutes ago. Someone came in here between now and then and cut out his eyes. Like I said, once the other officers arrive on scene, they'll take your statement. The campus PD officer drew his gun, but kept it lowered. With caution, he took one step into Dr. Ward's office. Do you think the killer was in the room with us? Miriam whispered to me. I shook my head, but then I shrugged. No, but maybe. There weren't any decent hiding places that I could think of, not unless the killer hid under the desk or something. We hadn't checked there. Dr. Vasquez was close enough to the desk that it's hard to imagine anyone could escape notice. But then again, Dr. Vasquez had been pretty emotional, and it was difficult even for me to grab his attention to show him the handprints. It was at least within the realm of possibility. The officer finished his sweep of the room and returned his gun to his belt before he came out into the hall. A few actual police officers finally arrived. Two of them walked past us and entered the office, and a third ushered us down to the other end of the hall. 4 paramedics rushed through the stairwell doors and bound down the corridor into Dr. Ward's office. When some more officers arrived, they separated Dr. Vasquez, Miriam, and myself. Dr. Vasquez was escorted into his office, and Miriam was taken to the stairwell. A third officer escorted me to the end of the hall outside of the philosophy library. I scanned my ID on the card reader so we could have a little privacy. When we were inside with the door shut, the officer invited me to sit down on one of the big leather armchairs in the middle of the room. He sat opposite me and readied a notepad. What's your name? He asked. Zara Rose. Well, Miss Rose, I'm sure this is a difficult moment for you, he said. I can assure you that we will do everything in our power to make you as comfortable as possible. Some of the questions I'm going to ask you are painful, but anything you can recall might end up being important. I nodded, though I did have apprehension. I was so close to the crime scene that I feared they were going to start grilling me. So, the officer continued, why don't you tell me where you were coming from before you discovered the body? I debated myself whether or not I should ask for a lawyer. The officer tapped his pen on the pad. Ma'am, your silence is a little suspicious. Sorry, officer, I'm just trying to recollect everything. He nodded, but his expression betrayed irritation. When you're ready, then. He leaned back and sank into his chair. I didn't want to come off as suspicious, but at the same time, what if my statement made me even more suspicious? I finally decided I needed to be helpful. Dr. Ward was dead. It was going to be a real long day if I assumed every interaction was going to be in bad faith. Are you ready now? The officer prompted. Sure, I said in a voice, but I doubt it sounded convincing. I inhaled deep. I attended class with my roommate, Miriam. She's the girl I was just with. Dr. Ward was our professor. We were waiting in his classroom, but when he failed to show up after 20 or so minutes, everyone agreed we should just leave. Something didn't feel right about that. It was very much unlike Dr. Ward to miss class without a prior announcement. I came up here to the faculty offices to see if there was anything wrong. And that's when you discovered Dr. Ward's body. Correct. Walk me through what the experience of finding him was like. Miriam followed me up here. We went straight for his office. When we found it locked, we nearly gave up. Dr. Vasquez heard us in the hallway, and he also suspected something was amiss when we explained Dr. Ward missed class. He unlocked the door, and that's when we found the body slumped over his desk. Dr. Ward's body was found leaning back in his office chair. The officer scratched his head underneath his cap with the clicky end of his pen. Yes, after we found him. What do you mean? When we first found Dr. Ward, he was spread across his desk. At a glance, it looked like he was sleeping, but then we saw all the blood. Okay, what happened next? To be honest, I'm not really certain. Miriam went into the hall to phone you, and she shut the door behind her. That's when I found the bloody handprints on the back of the door. Dr. Ward's palms were also bloody, so we thought maybe he was trapped inside and was trying to escape. I had a rush of nervous energy and bounced my leg up and down. Did you touch or manipulate Dr. Ward in any capacity? In actuality, I had turned his hand over, but wouldn't I be implicating myself for contaminating the evidence if I admitted that? I denied that anyone touched Dr. Ward. How do you account for the fact that the body was moved? I figured that because we didn't notice anyone in the hallway, other than the police, that the killer must have been in the room with us when we found him. All right, ma'am. Thank you for your help, he said. Is there anything else you'd like to share before I let you go? That's everything, I think. In that case, we'll be in touch if we need more information. Let me give you my card too. If you remember anything, call and report it straight to me. The whole interaction went much more smoothly than I could have expected. Of course, there was still the possibility that I would become a suspect later, or even that I already was, and they just didn't want to clue me in yet. But would the conversation really have ended like that if they were suspicious of me? I went back into the hall. Dr. Vasquez was still being questioned. The door to his office was shut. Cops were moving in and out of Dr. Ward's office. A tall man dressed in a suit, who I assume must be the detective, stepped out of the room with one hand covering his mouth. Camera shutters snapped, casting bright flashes of white light into the hall and off the concrete walls. The paramedics were gone. They probably took Dr. Ward with them, but I didn't go down the hall to check. There was a commotion in the stairwell. It sounded like someone shouting. I opened one of the double doors a crack and heard Miriam's voice. You're fucking kidding me, she said. So someone tries to do the right thing and you punish them for it? It's no wonder everyone hates cops. You need to calm yourself, miss, the officer in the stairwell said. No fucking way. You just said you're going to take me to jail, and now I'm supposed to be calm? Miss, this is no time to be difficult. You're being considered a suspect at this moment. And because you're a suspect, we have to take you to the station to interview you more thoroughly. I ran down the stairs to the next landing, where Miriam was being interviewed. The officer stood with his back to the descending stairs, as if his intention was to block her from running away. Miriam was in the opposite corner of the landing, seated on the ground with her hugging her knees to her chest. No way that's happening, I said. Miss, the officer said to me, I'm going to need you to go back upstairs until I finish my investigation. You call this investigating? I knew doubling down on this was probably a bad idea. You're making a baseless accusation against my friend who I was with all morning, by the way. Miss, your friend is a suspect in a murder investigation at present. The officer's tone communicated a no-nonsense attitude. I highly suggest that you let me conclude my work. Then you can have access to the stairs. You can't just take her, I protested. There's no evidence that she did anything. Not to mention, she's half Dr. Ward's size. How could she have overpowered him? Miriam made eye contact with me. I think she was trying to tell me something, but I didn't know if she was asking me for help or if she was telling me to get lost. Her eyes were so watery. I worried she was about to burst into tears. She looked so helpless. Miss, if you don't go back upstairs, then I'm going to have to take you to the station as well. Fuck that, I said. Do you know Miriam's dad is a civil rights lawyer? You better have a damn good reason for taking her unless you're sick of doing your job. I mean, that wasn't true, but I thought it was worth a shot. Miriam put her head in her hands. He didn't look like he bought it. You don't believe me, I said. How do you think she can afford to go to this school? It's because her dad gets paid every time idiots like you step outside the boundaries of their authority. Go on, try her. She didn't tell you that because she wants to watch you dig your own grave. Miss, her movement was unaccounted for by either other present party for the 15-minute window in which the body was moved. He paused like he was in a movie, waiting for the audience to feel the suspense. That is called reasonable suspicion. I looked at the officer's chest, and when Mr. Rothstein learns that his daughter has been arrested by the police for no reason, he will be very interested to know the name and badge number of the officer responsible. He side-eyed Miriam. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but then, even to my own surprise, he relented. He bit his lip, then tore out a business card and handed it to Miriam. I'll be in touch. Miriam snatched the card from his hand, but said nothing. The cop went back upstairs to rejoin his fellow officers. Miriam stared at me with a cold gaze. You nearly got me in a lot more trouble, she said. Did I, or did I get you out of it? What if you called your bluff? Then I'd be heading downtown right now. You would be too. But he didn't, and now you get to stay here. That's not the point. Miriam's head sank into her lap. You could have made all of that a lot worse. I'm just asking you to appreciate that. They believed me at Rothstein. Okay, and that's easy for you to say when it's my head on the line. Miriam, I said, they're cops. If they were smart, they'd be doing anything else. Just let me handle it next time. I thought about going back upstairs to see if Dr. Vasquez was also having trouble, but Miriam did kind of have a point. I was pushing my luck. Dr. Vasquez would have to talk his way out of this on his own. Miriam and I walked back to our dorm room in silence. Thank you.
I suppose you're wondering why I called you all here. Where do I start? In the beginning was the Big Bang. Then there was 14 billion years of evolution until finally the universe could make a human being as nice as Kathy Aguero. Now, please don't blame her, but she's the reason why I applied to this program. I saw her read at the Walnut Street Cafe, and it was great. I thought, I'm going to go where she is. She has degrees from Tufts, Boston University, and she also studied in Edinburgh, which I didn't know. And when I looked into that, she was famous for drinking the locals under the table, had developed a taste for wonderful whiskey, and was dancing on the table where the locals were playing bagpipes. I think you might have a challenge. I've heard through the grapevine there might be this Friday. This was only the start of her illustrious career. She has received grants from the Massachusetts Council of the Arts, the Elgin Cox Foundation. She served as a fellow at the Virginia Center of the Creative Arts, and is our good fortune to have her here at Solstice, which in turn makes it my good fortune to have had her as a mentor. As a testament for her strength and fortitude, she survived. Her poetry has appeared in a variety of journals, Conch, Massachusetts Review, Grist, and poetry, published several poetry collections, including After That, Investigations, The Mystery of the Girl Sleuth, The Real Weather, and Thirsty Day. She was also co-edited 3 volumes of cross-cultural poetry. I could go on and on. It would be much longer than I have time for. So I would like you to please give a warm welcome to Kathy Aguero, who I'm happy to have had as a mentor and who I call a friend. That's all right with you, right? Okay.
Well, it's wonderful to know that in addition to being a poet, Bob has talents as a fiction writer. Anyway, I'm so happy to be here. I love being at this program. I have been with Solstice since it started as a summer writing conference, and it's an honor to read with this talented faculty and to this amazing student body, also very talented. My water there. I always like to begin my readings with a poem by someone else. And tonight I would like to begin with a poem by Rita Dove. Incantation of the First Order by Rita Dove. Listen. No one signed up for this lullaby. No bleaked sheep or rosebuds or twitching stars will diminish the fear or save you from waking into the same day you dreamed of leaving. Mockingbird on the back order, morning bells stuck on snooze. So you might as well get up and at it. Pestilence be damned. Peril and risk having become relative, I'll try to couch this in positive terms. Never is the word of last resorts, always the fanatic's rallying cry. To those inclined to kindness, I say, come out of your houses drumming. All others, beware. I have discarded my smile, but not my teeth. I love the fierceness of that poem. So a number of the poems I'm reading tonight are ekphrastic poems. That is, people think of ekphrastic poems as being based on visual arts, but actually it's being based on any other form of art. It could be music, it could be dance, whatever. I'm part of a group on the North Shore called the Thursday Poets, of which Jennifer Jean, our new and future colleague, is also a part. And this poem was written, it's kind of a really interesting group. They go to different places and write poems. And we went to the Wenham Historical Museum, which is in a house that was actually connected to a judge in the witch trials. And this is Doll in the Bedroom. Wenham Historical Museum. I am the one in the gray blanket lying in the splintered cradle at the foot of the bed. My bonnet is dusty, my face brown ash, my smile sewn in place. I've been here since Sarah Hale, accused of witchcraft, was cleared by the good judge, her husband. Sometimes I think I remember the children hanging me in her stead, then coffining me here for expiation. After closing time, I restless roam, just as you fear I might. The pretty dolls stay mute, stay still, eyes unblinking as I whisk by. Too big to fit in the French dollhouse with its warning, don't touch, its fancy carved furniture, tiny chandeliers. All night, I ride the circling train to nowhere, crying, all aboard. There actually are trains in that museum that run all over the top of it. And this poem was also a kind of Thursday Poets poem. We got a tour of the it's called James Lee Hooper homestead in Marblehead, where there was an amazing painting called The Apotheosis of Washington, or reproduction of it after the painting by John James Barrelett, written in 1805. And it's, look at it, it's quite an amazing painting. It absolutely stunned me, not so much in its beauty as in its conception. The Apotheosis of Washington, after the painting by John James Barrelett, 1805. Washington basks in earthly adoration, arms extended, palms open in a gesture of blessing. He's regal, triumphant. Why did these anti-papists commission a work echoing Titian's Assumption of the Virgin Mary? But Titian's Mary looks toward heaven, carried on a cloud by cherubim. Here, Washington reclines on what look like bales of cloth made from cotton picked by slaves, fingers blistered, sweat steaming. An angel strains to haul him up a plank of light, while Father Time, in a short black robe that reveals his manly thighs, gives an assist, kneeling behind Washington, lugging him out of his crypt. Against his tomb, a woman leans, elbow on knee, head in hand, eyes downcast. A shield inscribed a pluribus unum, a metal helmet, a sword, littered the ground as if she's dumped them in disgust. On her shoulder, a staff crowned by a liberty cap, the kind worn by freed Roman slaves, while an eagle, sharp beak open, spreads its wings just behind. His back to the viewer, a defeated warrior slumps, tomahawk cast to the ground, while George looks past them, beaming, the worshipful crowd just out of sight. Farther left, tiny figures, faith, hope, and charity, dwarfed by our first president's magnificence. One is busy with 3 clinging babies. Another hides her face in her friend's lap. If these figures are grieving, what is it for? Washington's death, or the assured way he assumes Mary's bought. Perhaps they're just exhausted. And doesn't the third woman, hair covered by a blue mantle, remind you of the Mother of God? Is her hand lifted in tribute, or is she saying, get a look at who's taken my place? A man and a general. Isn't that always the way? This is also an ekphrastic poem, but the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem honored a Native American artist who always does these collaborative projects, whether it's sewing quilts or whatever with the community she works with. And this time, she had an amazing sculpture, kind of net hanging down from the museum. And there's something in Native American culture called the jingle dance, which is based on a dream. And in the jingle dance, women would wear these dresses that weighed, they said, 35 pounds. They had these kind of jingle cones made out of tobacco lids. And the legend is someone had a dream and this dance would heal his daughter, and that's what happened. So some of us were invited to view this dance and then write about it. And also the community part of it, she had these nets above hanging in the atrium, and everybody made these kind of cones out of these tobacco tin lids and sewed them on. So I was really happy to be part of that group, but it's hard, I'm not a Native American. So the dilemma was, how do I write about this without risking cultural appropriation? So what I wrote about was a memory it evoked in me. Dance of the Two Sisters, after seeing the jingle dance at Peabody Essex Museum. After the baby was cut from my belly, something went wrong. A tube down my nose into my stomach, a bag on a pole. And I, in my anger, refusing to speak, lay quiet as a corpse for 3 days. What could visitors do but shift in their seats near the foot of my bed? When I was alone, my sister entered, leaned over the bed rail, and laid her cool hands with her elegant fingers upon me to perform without sound, without motion, the dance of two sisters. It was then I softened and spoke. It was then I made friends with the tube. And the last poem I'm going to read is not exactly ekphrastic, but I don't know, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with that book, Goodnight Moon, a children's book by Margaret Wise Brown. And I was trying to write a poem about the things that are happening in Israel and Gaza. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And somehow the format of that book helped me. Goodnight Moon over Gaza, after Margaret Wise Brown. Good night, moon. Good night, drones. Good night, sobs. Good night, moons. Good night, lost paper, pens and books, soccer ball, teddy bear, paints and blocks. Good night to the voices that shout in the dark. Good night to the rockets, their orange red arc. Good night to the smoke, its choking and stink. Good night to erasers, to chalkboard and ink. Good night, schoolyard. Good night, teachers. Good night, body bags carried on stretchers. Good night, hospital collapsed by a bomb. Good night, someone's leg. Good night, someone's arm. Good night, shards of glass that sparkle and slice. Good night to the moths, and good night to the flies. Good night, Gaza City House. Good night, tent in Rafah. Good night, Mama's singing. Good night, Papa's laughter. Good night, muddy water. Good night, moldy bread. Good night to the bandages around Ahmad's head. Good night, hungry kitten. Good night, hungry rat. Good night, hungry brother and sister and aunt. Good night, my best friend, still my double star. Good night to Hind, trapped in a car, hungry and thirsty along with her dead. We know nothing about this, the IDF said. Good night, sirens. Good night, fear. Good night, soldiers everywhere. Thank you.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Lewis. I'm going into my second semester and I have the honor of introducing David Yoo today. David is a writer, musician, sports coach extraordinaire, but above all else, he's the absolute man. He received his BA from Skidmore College and his MA in creative writing from the University of Colorado Boulder. His novels like Stop Me If You Heard This One Before and Girls for Breakfast have gotten him a Chicago's Best of the Best selection, an NYPL Books for the Teenage selection, and a Reading Rant's top 10 books for Teen's Choice. And on top of that, he teaches fiction and humor writing classes here at Solstice and also at the Gotham Writers Workshop, which has a lot less to do with Batman than I originally thought. But going into my first semester, David kind of took this mythological status in my eyes. Coming into Solstice, I only had a handful of short stories. They're about this college trio and their hijinks that they go on campus. And almost like everyone rehearsed it off screen. Almost every one of my classmates was like, you should show this to David. Have you met David before? David would love this. He wasn't even on campus until the second half of the whole residency. So this name was just in every corner of the room, just kind of haunting me that first half, to the point where I was super nervous walking in the workshop with my work and just waiting to hear what he had to say. But my biggest surprise is he actually liked my college story. He gave me positive feedbacks and actually laughed at my jokes. And what was even more shocking is as I started to begin with him for my independent portion of my semester, he kept liking my stuff. So not only was that pretty cool, he kept giving me great tips and tricks to enhance my stories of fistfights, pickup lines, and streaking on campus. This once mysterious man was now in the trenches of every single double line space of every single page that I turned in. And this really helped me grow in confidence as a writer, to the point where my desktop now has a few extra more short stories to join the ones that I had walking into Solstice. Yeah, let's go. Yeah. But above all else, I'm really glad to have gotten to know David over this past semester and have gained him as a mentor, because above all else, nothing has gotten me more excited for the first of every month than a David Yoo response paper. So ladies and gentlemen, can you please help me with introducing David Yoo?
Thank you, Lewis. I'm a big fan of Lewis and his writing. As a mentor, though, I gotta say that intro was the best thing you've ever written. I'm just kidding. I'm gonna read a couple of scenes from an essay about temping back in my mid-20s. I can't see it. When I showed up for my gig manning the front desk at Fisher Systems on Thursday, I parked in the visitors section out front like I always did, but this time I noticed there was a police cruiser in the handicap spot. I walked up the brick pathway to the entrance and waved at Mark Lawton, the head security guy, to let me in. Lawton was a hefty, oddly gray-skinned man in his late 40s who grew up in Charlestown and had the requisite deep Boston accent made gravelly by a 2-pack-a-day Marlboro Reds habit. He worked the overnight shift during the week, and by the time I showed up in the mornings, he always looked like he was about to die with his eyes open. He glared at me as the front doors clicked and I headed inside. "What's going on?" I asked. "You're late," he said as he brushed past me. "Nice talking to you," I muttered. I settled in, and a few minutes later, Carl, the head of facilities, came down and sat in the chair next to me. He was accompanied by an electrician who ducked under my workstation and started messing with the cords as if he was trying to hotwire the desk. He then took a bright red phone out of a cardboard box. plugged it into the jack before placing it on top of the CPU. He picked up the receiver, pressed it to his ear, and said, "Yeah, I'm just making sure the line works. Thanks," before hanging up. "What's going on?" I asked Carl. "We had a security issue this morning. What I'm about to tell you is confidential, okay?" he said, and I nodded. "Yesterday, we laid off approximately 50 employees, and this morning a guy in shipping reported to work even though he'd been let go. I'd witnessed several mass firings at these temp jobs by this point, and added security measures were more often more obligatory than necessary. But then Carl leaned over and double-clicked the intranet icon and typed in a last name in the search box. A moment later, the thumbnail-sized headshot of a guy from shipping appeared on the screen. This man is not to be allowed into the building at all costs. We've deactivated his badge, but you know how the old badges still sometimes work? Well, if he manages to get through those glass doors, you need to do everything in your power to keep him in the lobby, and make sure you call me on this Nextel pager. Here, I set it up so you can simply press this button and I'll immediately know what's going down. Meanwhile, this red phone is an emergency hotline to the Woburn Police Department. Just pick up the receiver and you should be automatically patched through." "Why is this even necessary?" I asked. "The guy got physical with some employees, and Woburn Police escorted him out in cuffs this morning. Thing is, he made some parting remarks that warranted the additional security measures." "What'd he say?" "Oh, basically, he just said he was going to return with a gun and shoot up the place. You see, Dave, I know you're not a trained security professional, but the fact is, with the setup we have here, you really are our first line of defense." He could tell I was frowning, probably because of the expression on my face. "Don't worry, more than likely he won't come back. People say crazy things in the heat of the moment." He patted me on the shoulder and left. I felt staggered by the update. Had he really just called me the first line of defense? This coming from the same guy who earlier that month had vehemently replied no when I repeatedly asked if I could have a single cheap-ass company pen. There were boxes and boxes of them in the mailroom because none of the full-time employees wanted them. I repeated the phrase in my head, first line of defense. The rough translation was that I was expected, if necessary, to take a bullet for the team for 12 measly bucks an hour. I stared unblinking at the guy's picture all morning because for the life of me, I couldn't seem to remember what he looked like the moment I minimized the screen. I searched and researched every drawer of the desk, even though I knew by heart the contents inside each one, hoping I'd somehow never noticed the flare gun or a flak jacket tucked behind the box of spare staples all these months. Every person who appeared in the security monitors resembled the guy. I'd swivel my chair around and check the back entrance before scrutinizing the security monitors, trying to spot if a suspicious car pulled into either lot, and then I'd wheel back around to check the front entrance again. The zillionth time I did this, I swiveled back to the front and saw that there was an elderly lady tapping the glass door with a cane, and my heart imploded. For a moment, I'd mistaken the cane for a 12 gauge. I let the old lady in and she asked to use the restroom. I was so relieved she wasn't the disgruntled worker that I pointed her in the direction of the nearest lab without forcing her to sign in before resuming digging around the drawers for potential protection. I took out a plastic box full of paper clips and stared at it for a minute. It was clear that if I wanted to protect myself, I was going to have to make something from scratch with the raw materials at my disposal. Thankfully, in addition to being a writer, I was also an amateur inventor. So in theory, this situation lent itself to my skill set. I took a rectangular eraser, straightened the paperclip, then inserted it halfway into said eraser. I had no idea what I was making, but it seemed like a good start. I looked around. Scraps of PVC piping was leaned up against the wall. On the floor was a dry sponge resting in a plastic bucket with a bottle of 409. I grabbed the sponge and sprayed a little 409 onto it to make it more malleable. Yes, I thought. I then rolled it into as tight a wad as possible, which dispersed excess droplets of 409. Excellent. Then I jammed the sponge into in wonder as the sponge expanded, creating an airtight seal. I marveled at my ingenuity. Finally, I wedged the long eraser deep into the centermost fold of the sponge so that the straightened paper clip stuck out. I was so focused on the project that I didn't even realize an employee was standing in front of me. "What are you making there, buddy?" he asked, startling me. I stared dumbly at my contraption. "I have no idea." "It looks like a giant dildo," he said, smirking at me. "Is that what it looks like to you?" I asked him. He glared at me and left. I gripped the rudimentary spear, satisfied with the weight, but then the pointy end barely grazed the file cabinet and the thing shattered into a dozen pieces like a popsicle stick grenade. I stared sadly at the scattered remains. "Stupid, worthless dildo," I whispered. A few minutes later, the doorway to stairwell C across the lobby opened. Carl escorted the elderly lady to the exit, eyeballing me the entire time. I mentally cringed. She said, "Thank you, kind young man," like some cliche granny as he let her out. Carl stomped over to me. "Did you let that woman into the building?" he demanded. I nodded. "She said she just needed to use the can." "How could I trust you to watch the entrance if you don't even make strangers sign in? What was I supposed to think when I saw her walking around on the 4th floor?" Well, this was the one exception, given her advanced state. It's not like she presented a viable threat or anything. That's not for you to decide. What if she died on the premises? She wasn't that old, I argued. That kind of lackadaisical attitude's unacceptable. You're here to follow my instructions. If you can't do that, maybe this isn't the right place for you. I didn't say anything. After lunch, I resumed my post as corporate watchdog. With one eye constantly trained on the front entrance, I spent the bulk of the afternoon continuing to look around for serviceable forms of protection. I sharpened a dozen pencils for hand-to-hand combat, even though I was street smart enough to know that you don't bring a number 2 pencil to a gunfight. But I at least felt proactive to do so. I must have gotten really absorbed in my daydreaming because at one point I was startled by the crash of the cordless pencil sharpener smashing against the far wall before realizing that I was the one who'd, in a panic, hucked it. Clearly, my brain was fried from actually having to exert itself at temping for once. So I was relieved when Luke, a 19-year-old kid from Revere who split the overnight shift with Lawton, arrived 10 minutes early. His dream in life was to become a police officer, and he took criminal justice classes at a community college during the day. He'd recently failed the entrance exam for the police academy for the 3rd time and had to settle for tooling around in a used Chevy Caprice, the same model used by local police, as well as people who like pretending they were the police, and working this security gig. Luke took his job extremely seriously. He kept a bottle of mace that I'm pretty sure was illegal, secured to his high side holster, and he complemented the blue security uniform with black jackboots. But the job was usually so uneventful that he ended up spending the entire time drawing sorely overshaded depictions of his favorite video game character, Solid Snake, from the Metal Gear series. He was also really into punk music, but as a lifelong ageist, I didn't respect his passion because he was born in the mid-'80s and listened to Blink-182 more than he did The Clash. Usually I hated people like that, but Luke had gotten on my good side because of an incident a few weeks earlier. Michelle from Accounts Payable was showing me how to fill out certified mail forms that day. And at one point, while she was prattling on, I lightly exhaled through my nose and, mind you, nothing like this had ever happened to me before and hasn't since. A gigantic booger popped out of my left nostril and landed, after an agonizingly slow arc, smack dab onto the center of the envelope. Thing is, Michelle didn't skip a beat and just kept on explaining things. When she turned away to get an eraser, I casually swiped the monstrosity onto the floor as discreetly as possible. When she was gone, I searched for it, but it was nowhere to be found. I imagine it must have rolled 60 feet and under the sofa in the far end of the lobby. Despite being appalled with myself, I kind of wanted to find it. So I told Luke about it when he showed up that afternoon, and he came up with a brilliant idea. We went into the security office, where he queued up the tape from the security cam in the lobby that was aimed at the front desk. Holy moly. I deduced the general time range within which this incident must have occurred. And then we watched a mute black and white video of Michelle standing over me, and my stomach dropped when I actually saw the booger launch out of my nose. Even worse, Michelle clearly grimaced behind my shoulder when it happened. At first I was mortified, but then Luke replayed it a zillion times in slow motion, and we ended up laughing our asses off. And that's how he became my seventh best friend. Carl came down and briefed Luke on the additional security detail, and the kid's eyes lit up. Afterward, I watched Luke position himself in the chair, facing out to the... Can everyone still hear me? No, I'm just kidding. Should I just keep going? All right. I don't know. Maybe I'll start over. I don't know where I'm at. Okay, here we are. Luke positioned himself in the chair facing out to the lobby rather than the computer monitor so he could see both entrances at once. It hadn't occurred to me to simply alter my vantage point so I wouldn't have to swivel in my seat every 10 seconds. I rubbed my aching neck as he settled in, feeling increasingly revolted by how gung-ho he was about the security threat. Actually, I felt bad for the kid. He was going to end up getting killed on the job someday. If not tonight, then another night. If not at this job, then at a ground round or something. Why do you care so much about this job? I finally asked. It's not like being a real cop. It's just sitting around. You don't even have a night's... Why am I talking into this thing? I don't understand that technology. Why do you care so much about that? I already read that. It's not like being a real cop. It's just sitting around. You don't even have a nightstick or anything. If this guy shows up with a gun, you shouldn't stick your neck out for this place. Seriously, how much do they pay you? $14 an hour, he said. Exactly, I replied, and he reddened, but I didn't give a shit that I hurt his feelings because I was secretly fuming to learn that despite having a goddamn master's degree, I still earned $2 an hour less than him. It ain't worth it, trust me. Yes, it is, he said softly. Give me one good reason why. He glared at me at the wall behind me, and I realized his top lip was actually quivering a little. I'm not a moron, he finally said, and I winced a little. I mean, I know you don't think that. I'm aware, though, that I'm basically no different from mall security. But what the hell else do I do all day? I want to be a cop so I can actually help people. But in the meantime, I mean, sure, the pay sucks, but if I try my hardest, I get to go home at night feeling like I actually did something meaningful. That's worth more than money, isn't it? I nodded slowly for several seconds before gently placing a hand on his shoulder, and then I said, honestly, that might just be the stupidest speech I've ever heard in my entire life. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Sorry about the microphone, everyone. But can we have one more round of applause